Hi, how you doing? It's early May and I've just been checking my hascap bushes to see if they're blooming yet. We've had a particularly cold spring, so they're not quite there yet, but it's going to be any day now. I'm a big fan of these berries. I love the flavor, and today I'm here to tell you all about them. My name is Sharon. I garden on a large yard in a small town in east central Saskatchewan, Zone 3. Welcome to my Sask Garden. It's still cool out there today. There's a cool breeze, so I'm going to take advantage of the warmth of the greenhouse. So hascaps, or honeyberries, are a really great, rock-solid, hardy, berry-producing shrub for cold zones. They're hardy down to zone 2. They have no need for any special kind of winter treatment. They're not large shrubs. They require very little in the way of maintenance. It doesn't sucker. It has no thorns. It has no canes to manage like raspberries. It has no runners to manage like strawberries. And it has no disease or fungal issues to manage like Saskatoon berries can. They bloom very, very early, and so every bee in the neighborhood will be at the hascap shrubs getting every flower pollinated. These shrubs are really practically foolproof, and they thrive where other fruits fail. Hascaps belong to the honeysuckle family, specifically Lonicera caerulea. It's also often referred to as honeyberry, and actually when you go shopping for these plants, you will often see that as the name instead of hascap. They're also often referred to as blue honeysuckle. It's a circumpolar species native to the northern boreal forests of Asia, Europe, and North America. And the breeding that has gone into what we plant and eat today, it comes from crossbreeding all of those plants from all of those regions for about the last 75 years. Here in Canada, and right here in my home province, the University of Saskatchewan has been integral in producing great tasting, heavy producing varieties of hascaps. The bushes don't have anything visually remarkable. They bloom very early, as I said, but the blooms are small and the shrub isn't particularly decorative in bloom, but it's really not ugly either. Green leaves through the season, and my 3 bushes that I've noticed, they don't take on any fall coloring at all. Really, they are just rather tidy, globe-shaped fruiting bushes that don't get too big. They would be pretty easy to add to the landscape as a shrub element. They grow to around 4 or 5 feet or so in height and width. It does depend some on the variety. And mine are not yet that big. Mine are about hip height or so, and I'm going to say they're about 6 years old now. So about that taste of a honeyberry, you may have tasted one and thought it was awful or too tart or something. The taste has been described in many ways. It is tart, and the level of tartness does depend a whole lot on the variety and how ripe the berry is. Although the color of that berry might lead you to believe it's going to taste like a blueberry or a Saskatoon, I don't think it does at all. Some people may find that it tastes a little bit like a blueberry. I don't. It really does have its own flavor. They are also much tastier when they're fully ripe and the flesh is blue all the way through. And if there's any green inside, if that berry is still showing some green inside, then that's where the tartness or that sourness is going to come from, because they are not yet ripe. The berry is that nice powdery blue on the outside. It's usually an elongated berry, not round, and they are blue quite early in their ripening process. But you kind of have to wait until that berry is almost falling from the bush before picking it. If you have to pull at the berries at all to get them off, they're not ripe enough. I'll get into ways you can use the berries just a little later in the video. Also, there's great nutritional value in hascaps. They're often called a superfruit for a very good reason, and I'm just going to put some text up on the screen. Per 100 gram of fresh berries, they are low in sugar, 5.7 to 10.3 grams of sugar, compared to about 15 grams in blueberries. Fructose makes up over half of the total of sugars. And again, this is the difference here is going to be in the variety, because some varieties are sweeter. It's high in fiber, and it has some vitamin C in it, as well as minerals of potassium, calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus. And the superfruit factor comes from the fact that beyond the basic vitamins in the berries, the real magic of Haskaps is their high antioxidant capability and anti-inflammatory capacity. And if you want more information on all of that, here's something that you can take a screenshot of. And when you go to buy hascap plants, they're widely available now. Pretty much anywhere where that sells fruiting shrubs, you're going to find hascaps. And as I mentioned, they could also be called honeyberries. They're going to have big blue-looking berries on the pot with some term of honeyberry on there. There is one golden rule about planting hascaps or honeyberries, is that you cannot just plant one. And you must have different varieties. You can't plant 2 of the same variety or 3 of the same varieties. All hascaps are self-incompatible, and they require a different compatible variety to be blooming at the same time in order to produce fruit. So you do have to be careful on selection. And for example, the last couple of years, a big box store was selling some hascap bushes. But they didn't appear to have any variety name included. There was no tag or anything on the pot that indicated the variety. Simply buying a generic hascap bush, or 2 or 3 of them, may all turn out to be the same variety. And the same variety will not cross-pollinate with each other. I would suggest not buying generic hascaps at all. Unless you already have a bunch of hascaps in your yard, then you're probably safe that those generic ones will cross-pollinate with something else in your yard. When you buy generic, you just have no idea what it's compatible with. This really is a buyer beware kind of situation that targets the unknowledgeable customer. And honestly, I think the suppliers to the big box store should be a little bit more responsible there and provide some clue as to the variety. So you need at least 2 different varieties compatible with each other for pollination, and at first blush this may seem difficult, but there is this handy chart I'll show a little later that simplifies which varieties are compatible with which. There also are some pollinator varieties that are really good for a whole lot of other types of varieties of hascaps. Personally, I stuck with the super simple, and I have my 3 plants are all growing from the Boreal series. There are 4 in the series. They are Boreal Beauty, Beast, Blizzard, and the newest one is Bliss. I have the first 3. I don't have Bliss, but I sure would like to get one to add to the planting. I think I can manage one more there. Bliss is quite new. I think it's just available for buying in the last year or 2. And I'll be keeping this on my list to watch out for, because it is supposed to be the sweetest one yet. That Boreal series that I have, they are all premium, large berried, and high yielding cultivars that were developed by the University of Saskatchewan. They are internationally renowned with hascap growers, knowing that they are so good and so high yielding. These hardy Zone 2 plants offer improved fruit size that is double other cultivars, excellent flavor, and extended harvest times. Typically they bloom early, but ripen from July and into August, sometime from the end of June. And depending on the variety, again, because they do have some extended ripening times. The University of Saskatchewan website offers extensive information on all of these varieties, and I'll have links in the description below for further reading if you choose to do so. The difference between them is slight variations on the level of sweetness as well as the time when they ripen, but they're all going to ripen within, I'm going to say, a 6-week window. So as I said, those Boreal varieties are renowned for having larger and more vigorous fruit than some of the older cultivars, and really we're lucky that it's fairly easy to get them here especially in the prairie provinces. Blizzard, within that series, Blizzard has a lower acidity, and Bliss is, like I said, supposed to be sweeter with a higher Brix reading. The first one, Boreal Beast. So there's Beast, Beauty, and Blizzard. Beast is commonly used as a pollinator for all the other three. So if you're buying the Boreal series, just remember that Beast is the pollinator for the other two. You need Beast. And besides the Boreal series, the other top varieties that are like the gold standard for our climate, and they were bred by Dr. Bob Boers right here in Saskatchewan at the U of S. Aurora is one. It is the sweetest with very large berries, and it's a large vigorous shrub. Borealis is another really excellent sweet tangy flavor for fresh eating, and it is an average size shrub. Another one is Tundra. It has firm sweet tart berries, holds fruit well, and doesn't get mushy. Indigo Gem is reliable, sweet, tangy, slightly chewy texture. And Honeybee is known for tart berries. Berry Blue is another one, and I see this a lot now for sale. It's either a Russian or Czech variety, and it's a good pollinator for most of the other hascaps, but it will not self-pollinate. You still will need another berry, but just because it's a good pollinator doesn't mean it's not going to produce its own good berries, because this Berry Blue is also able to produce a great yield of good tasting berries. So just to clarify, when I refer to some of them as pollinators, that doesn't mean that they don't produce their own good tasting berries, because they do as well. And so here is the hascap compatibility chart from the University of Saskatchewan. You can take a screenshot here, or it's also available at the U of S link that I've noted below. So say, for example, you want to buy an Aurora hascap. You just go across here and you see that Tundra, Borealis, and the Indigo series and Honeybee are all excellent pollinators that are compatible with Aurora. And then if you look at Aurora with Aurora in the chart, it says bad, and that means it won't pollinate. And so the key below the chart shows excellent is best pollination, but good would also be, well, good. This is not an all-encompassing list of varieties though. For example, Berry Blue is not listed there, but is an excellent variety. If you're thinking about planting a lot of hascap, like more than just a few in your yard, it's recommended to have one pollinator type for every 5 compatible varieties, and to have those spaced out accordingly. And so in our cold zone 3 climate, they bloom generally sometime in early May. This year everything is late, and so, you know, as I mentioned, they will no doubt bloom later than previous years. I really have been expecting to see the buds forming, but there's nothing there yet. And when I first started to grow them, it really did surprise me how early they bloomed. If it wasn't for all of the bees on the plant, I may have actually missed that bloom entirely. My 3 bushes, when they're in bloom, are absolutely covered in bees. And really, I think it's because there's basically nothing else except maybe dandelions at that time. So you're really feeding the early pollinators by having a few hascaps in your yard. As for growing them, they require full sun, over 6 hours, for the best yield. If you go into partial shade, the bloom and berry production would probably not be as high. The shrubs are tolerant of part shade, but I think in full sun you're going to probably get the heaviest production as well as the sweetest berries. They're very forgiving of soil type, but they do prefer a well-drained soil. Their preference is supposed to be slightly acidic, but my soil is more alkaline, and they're fruiting great. They're growing great. I read an article by Dr. Bob Boers from the Department of Plant Sciences at the University of Saskatchewan, who, as I mentioned, did or was integral in a vast majority of the breeding going on there. I'll also link that article here in this video description because it's a good article to read. He states that plants at the U of S are growing in clay soil with a pH of 7.9. So it's quite alkaline, and much higher than blueberries, for example, which need a fairly acidic soil. In fact, hascaps will grow happily in most soils that we would be able to provide them, unless the soil is nutrient deprived. For moisture, they do require consistent moisture, about an inch a week. They don't like drought, but also don't like to sit in standing water. Mine haven't particularly suffered in drought conditions, but certainly years when we've had good rains in June is when I have had the biggest and juiciest berries come off those plants. Like any shrub or tree, consistent watering for the first 2 or 3 years is critical in having a long-term healthy plant. Once they get their roots down really low, it's a little bit different story. Like any plant as well, it's important to water deeply and less frequently than shallow watering. Also, you have to know your soil. If you have a lot of clay, like mine does, clay holds on to deep moisture for a long time until it dries out, and then it's like a rock. But if your soil is sandy, you would need to possibly have to water more often. I use a straw mulch. I'd recommend a mulch of some sort to help retain moisture and keep the soil temperature more even. It also helps with microbes in the soil to have a nice mulch, and it's just all in all a healthier plant. Optimal spacing, they say, is 4 to 5 feet apart. Mine are more like about a meter apart, 3 feet apart, and they are planted in a triangular shape. So far, I've been able to put a small stool in the center, and I sit in there, and when I have to pick from the inside, I sit in there and I pick from right from the center of that triangle. To do it over again, I'd probably grow these elsewhere and in a row. For one reason is for picking. It would probably make picking a little easier. The past couple of years, I've actually thought about moving my 3 shrubs, but you know, they are growing so happy in the spot that they're in that really I just don't want to mess with that. If you were going to move hascaps, I did research that, and it's best to move them when they are completely dormant. So very late fall or very early spring. And I would say early spring would be kind of tough because they bloom so early. So far, I have not fertilized my shrubs at all. They are very healthy shrubs that are absolutely covered in blossoms and then berries. If needed, I'd probably start with adding my own compost before anything else. Hascaps, it seems, would be very easy to grow organically, and I suppose I could say mine are, because I've added or used nothing except water to this point. Hascaps bloom on 1-year-old wood, and in the first 3 years you would not want to prune anything. You would only want to remove dead or broken branches if you have any, and do no other pruning. Just let them grow. Anything over 3 years old, if you think that it's needed, you would want to remove only maybe 10 to 20% of the oldest and thickest branches, and that pruning should be concentrated on opening up the center of the plant to light. You wouldn't want to give light pruning all the way around because they fruit on 1-year-old wood, and so that's what you would be cutting off. So that kind of pruning would get rid of the next potential harvest. Also, you wouldn't want to prune after harvest, which would be probably late July, because the plant would still be in a position to push a bunch of soft new growth, which would not have sufficient time to grow strong enough to survive the winter. My bushes are, I think, about 6 years old now, and I pruned for the first time last fall. Mostly I wanted to remove all the bottom branches to get rid of the fruit that was setting really, really low down on the plant, and it actually lays on the ground. And I just don't want to bend that far to pick fruit, and I also don't want it falling and rotting on the ground there either. So yeah, that's what I did, and I also did prune out just a few of the woody interior branches just to open up the center to light and, you know, encourage fresh new growth, because that's where the berries form. So the bottom line for pruning is don't do anything for the first at least 3 years. When you do, prune in late winter. Only remove the oldest and thickest branches, and never do a light shear over the whole plant like a hedge. Hascaps are largely pest and disease free. There is one main fungal foe, and that is powdery mildew. Some varieties are more susceptible than others. I've never had any fungal issues, so I can't, provide any words of wisdom there. The symptoms are white powdery spots on leaves late in the season. And to manage that, you would want to do a little bit of pruning just for good airflow. I think there are also several fungicides registered for use on hascaps to treat powdery mildew. Personally, I'd probably go the organic route and use a sulfur spray or neem oil at the first sign. As I said, I've never had any fungal issues of any kind. Probably our climate is just too dry and too windy, and I don't really have fungal issues with anything except for maybe columbine. And with them, I think even without humidity, sometimes those heavy morning dews and cool weather can help powdery mildew take hold. Birds are the #1 problem, particularly waxwings, but also robins and catbirds in my yard. If you're thinking of growing these bushes, you also need to think about being prepared with some netting to prevent the birds from gaining access. I net my shrubs with the same netting I use for cabbage moths. On Amazon, I found a 13-foot by 33-foot piece of mesh that covers all my shrubs from top to bottom, and it will fit a 4th shrub as well. I'd just like to say a note about bird netting. You know, you can buy that plastic mesh black see-through stuff that is called bird netting, and it will deter birds, but it also catches them. I think the grid is around 1 inch that you have to be careful with, and it's too big. It will catch the birds. It's what I unknowingly used the first year that I netted them. But it actually caught a whole bunch of waxwings, and they became entangled in the netting. Thankfully, I walked by and I saw them before all the poor things died, and we were able to cut the netting off around each bird and set them free. So I won't use that black plastic netting anymore. I actually threw it out. I think it's awful stuff. It should come with some sort of a tangle warning. If you can get a small grid, maybe a 1/2 inch or even a 1/4 inch would be better in that kind of stuff. That would be safer. But I've gone to using this mesh, and it's like screening, and I really do prefer it. It's easy to take on and off. The black stuff will get caught. This white stuff, I use some bricks to hold it in place on the ground, and I pin it with clothespins to keep it closed up. It doesn't get tangled in the plants. It doesn't blow away in the wind. You would net your hascaps anytime after the bloom is done and the bees are no longer visiting, but before the berries start turning purple, because the waxwings know their colors. They won't touch the green berries, but they're sitting around waiting for them to ripen just as much as I am. And so as soon as I start seeing some purple on those berries, I know it's time to put the net up. I can leave an Amazon link below for this large mesh, which is actually the biggest piece of mesh that I've found. That 13-foot width, as well as it being 33 feet long, is what makes it so much better. As for insect trouble, I've not had any, except for maybe ants that get on the fruit that touch the ground. And so that's another reason to keep the ground nice and clean underneath of dropping fruit. As far as I know from my own experience as well as research, there is no bug or beetle or insect that attacks hascaps. As for deer pressure, you know, a couple years ago, I had a deer test nibble some branch tips. That was in the winter. We usually don't have deer in the summer. But that deer didn't spend a whole lot of time at the bushes. This past winter, we had nightly visits from many deer. Every night, they pass by that part of the yard where I have the hascap bushes, and they ignored them. So I mentioned that harvest is generally, the main one is probably July. It could start toward the end of June for me, but definitely into July. I haven't weighed the harvest, but I probably freeze 3 large bags full from my 3 bushes. And I'm sure a freezer bag full would probably hold, I'm going to say 3 or 4 kilos. You get a lot of fruit, and like from a mature bush, you get a lot of fruit. If you protect it from the birds, you'll get a lot of fruit. If you don't protect it from the birds, and you may not even realize that the birds are eating them, but You know, you go to look and you're going to say, oh, there's no berries, and that's because the birds have already eaten them. You'll also need to be just a little careful when picking because the ripe berries are quite soft. Fortunately, ripe berries are easy to remove, and like I said, if they aren't easy to remove, if you have to pull on them, your berries aren't yet ripe. They should come off clean and with a gentle hand because they are soft. There's very little debris or stems to pick out or anything like that. There are no worms. They really are easy peasy in that way. So I freeze a lot of my harvest. I keep some in the fridge initially when they're picked for fresh eating, either a handful of them or in yogurt, or they're great in a smoothie. But I freeze the rest on cookie sheets, and then after they're frozen, I bag them in those large Ziplocs. They don't clump together, they freeze very easily. Frozen berries hold their texture really well, even a year later, and they're still great looking berries. There's, no freezer burn or anything like that. I've made jam as well as a thick syrup with them. That's pretty easy. They're high in natural pectin, and so a jam sets pretty quick. The skins just seem to disintegrate, really. Even eating fresh, the skin is almost unnoticeable. I've not juiced them yet, but I think they would make a superb juice as well as a great jelly. Combining it with other berries would be interesting for sure. Apparently they make good ice cream, and I could see that being the case. It would be great to try that. An easy way really would be to make a syrup and use it as an ice cream topping to start, or on a cheesecake. That would be yummy. Fresh hascaps are also a nice addition to a fruit salad, or even a few tossed into a spinach salad. Much like a tart grape, I think they pair very well with cheese. You can make muffins with them, crumbles, crisps. They can be simmered with a balsamic vinegar and maybe some honey, and then used with pork or maybe some wild meat dishes, either as a glaze or as a finishing drizzle. I love roasted root vegetables, and we eat them a lot, and this is a very tasting finishing drizzle for them as well. I have read that they can be dehydrated. I don't have a dehydrator, so I've not tried this, but I read that it makes, dehydrating them makes a sweet tart type of raisin, which can be used for trail mix or granola or baking. Instructions are to dehydrate them at 135 degrees F or 57 C for 8 to 12 hours. And instructions for making juice or concentrate is to simmer berries with minimal water, maybe 1 cup of water for 4 or 5 cups of berries, mash, and then strain through a cheesecloth. I have a steam juicer, and so if I were going to steam any for juice, it would be that way with the steam juicer. And of course they could be used to make wine. I don't make wine. I've read that it makes a dry tannic red wine similar to a Cabernet Franc. I just don't drink wine, so I don't know what that is. Anyways, it requires age. So if you have hascaps, I'd love to know your favorite way to use them. As I said, the University of Saskatchewan has a lot of information, as does the website hascap.ca. Also has a ton of information on their website, and in the United States, honeyberryusa.com also has a ton of information. In the United States, they do tend to be referred to as honeyberries, and in Canada, we refer to them here as hascap more often. And all those websites and all the information I'm going to link in the video description down below. So if you want a berry bush in your yard that laughs at Zone 3 winters, feeds the bees, and asks almost nothing from you, plant hascaps. Thanks for hanging out today and for watching this video. I really do appreciate it. I hope you found it helpful in some way, and if you did, give me a thumbs up, give me a hype, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. I hope you're doing well. See you soon.